welcome to another episode of Dynamic Duos. I'm Dustin Holland. Usually I work behind the scenes on the show, but this episode we're doing things a little differently and giving you, our wonderful listeners, an opportunity to meet the hosts of the show. So I've got today, we are joined by CBR's very own Brittany Frederick, Sam Stone, and Brian Cronin. They're here today to talk about their experience as pop culture writers and look back at the year 2023 and look ahead to what they're most excited about for 2024. So thank you for joining us, and I can't wait to listen in.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us together to just kind of break virtual bread and compare geeky notes. Yeah, I mean 2023, or I guess 2024, off to a great. And Brittany, you went to Broadway. You saw something on Broadway.
I did. I had seen it off Broadway originally in 2022, but Merrily We Roll Along, the Sondheim revival, transferred to Broadway in 23. And so I had the great honor of going back to see that again. It is the best theatrical experience I have ever had. Like, I actually legitimately cried in the middle of a theater, which I don't do. So it was fantastic to see my favorite actor, Sam. As you know, I'm a big Jonathan Groff fan, so to get to see him on stage, literally maybe 10 feet from me, was fantastic. Lindsay Mendez from All Rise, of course, is in that, and Daniel Radcliffe. So it was just a masterclass in what makes great theater. And then I got to actually go with my acting coach, and so we got to spend the night together comparing notes and geeking out about that. So that was definitely my favorite thing I did all year, because not only did I do that, I actually got to run into Jonathan afterwards. So top 10 bucket list moment of my life when you're standing on the street next to Jonathan Groff. So,
well, and was it around this time last year that you got to talk to him for Knock at the Cabin?
Yeah, it was really funny about that. Was I thought about, do I mention that? Do I mention that he already knows who I am? And then I'm like, don't. I'm like, your personal life is your personal life, and your work is a different thing. And if he recognized me from that, he didn't say it, but we have mutual friends, so it's kind of like in that setting, I'm just like, oh, I'm a friend of his. So that was really fun. He actually got to see my acting reel. My acting coach had sent him the video, and so I said, okay, I'm kind of scared to ask. He goes, unprompted goes, oh, I saw your tape, and I went, oh no. And I said, okay, give it to me straight. Like, how was it? He goes, oh, you were amazing. And he just goes on, and I kid you guys, like I blanked out. I don't remember the rest of the words because I'm just standing there staring at him. And I actually asked my acting coach, I said, what the hell did he just say to me? And he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, that's great. Wow. He's like, because I was just staring at you being that excited. And I'm like, okay. So when your hero tells you you're amazing, you take the win.
Yeah. Brian, you getting anything in the...
Well, actually, funny, Brittany and I talked. I saw Merrily was off Broadway as well. So it's kind of cool that we both saw this particular show. Anything Sondheim, my wife we have a whole room decked out in Stephen Sondheim stuff. So anytime there's a new show, we usually will go see it on Broadway.
Oh, right on. Yeah. No, in terms of like blanking out, whenever I can always keep it together during an interview. But afterwards it's just like, I'll like walk out of a press room or turn off Zoom or whatever and be like, I just talked to Nicolas Cage. There's a delayed reaction.
That's funny.
I think for me, where like, which I guess helps in the interview. I don't know how to, I don't watch my own work. I don't know how to, it's always such a pain, like transcribing my own stuff, because I have to hear my own stupid voice. So yeah, cool. Yeah, I mean, I haven't, all the times I've been in New York, I've never seen anything on Broadway.
Really?
It just never. I know. It's not like it's not a conscious like what's
do
the
you Broadway, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It's like I only do off Broadway.
That's right.
I just I've seen. I live in the DC area, so I see stuff at the Kennedy Center.
Oh, gotcha.
All the time. But I go to New York a fair amount, and I've never caught anything on stage. No Phantom, no Les Mis, just no. What's a good dramatic one? Kill a Mockingbird. Sorkin's To Kill a Mockingbird, which is to say Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. It just never happened. So one of these, maybe 2024 is the year where I change that, and maybe it's Merrily.
Well, Brian, didn't they just extend that?
Yes, I did. You said you're
So
going
Sam
back.
has no excuse.
You're going
Sam,
back,
you have
right,
until
Chris?
July.
You're
I have
seeing it
until
later
July.
this year, aren't you?
Yeah, I will be back in March. I really wanted my family to go and see it, and I wanted a chance to see it one more time. And so the original, I think, closing was end of March, and so I
Yeah.
will be back end of March to see it one last time. And then, of course, right after, I changed my whole schedule, and of course, go into several $1,000s of debt to make all the travel arrangements. Then they extended it. I'm like, oh, I could have waited
hilarious.
until June and saved the money up for it. But my friend pointed out, they said just because the play is extending doesn't mean Jonathan's going to be there.
That's true. That's true.
And I'm like, that's fair. Like that's one of the big reasons I'm going back. And I would be really annoyed if I flew all the way to New York from California and he wasn't there.
Yeah. It's you know how it is with this business, like
Yep.
extensions and scheduling conflicts and all that kind of stuff. So
It's funny. I've given ticket in the past. That's one of a go-to Christmas is getting tickets to Broadway stuff. But man, it is crazy how expensive Broadway stuff is now. Maryland in particular it's crazy.
Yeah. I think
My
that's
wife and I we got tickets to Hamilton early on the first year. Before, like as soon as they announced that it was going to be on Broadway, we thought, hey, if people really want to see this badly, we'll put our tickets out. We listed them for some crazy amount, didn't sell because we wanted to see the show, so we put it out. But that same ticket, a couple after the Tonys came out, same ticket was going for $1,200.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? It's crazy.
You could go to Coachella twice for that.
No, I have the worst story about that. And it's not an entertainment story, it's a sports story. But I'm a San Diego Padres fan, grew up as a Padres fan. So when they made the playoffs last season,
Right.
I jumped on Ticketmaster, was very lucky to get a pair of tickets to the National League Championship Series. And paid some ridiculous amount for them, and then immediately had buyer's remorse. I went, my dad, who goes to me at every game, was out of town, and I'm going, I just spent $1,600 on these tickets. He's gonna look at me and go, why did you do that? He's not gonna want to go. And so I said, okay, what I'm gonna do is put them on StubHub for, again, some really stupid number.
Right.
And if they sell, they sell. And if they don't, I'll take my dad and we'll have a good time. They sold overnight. Like I literally just made up some number. And that actually paid for part of my trip to New York because I did not expect them to go, and they went overnight. So part of me regrets it because then we swept the Dodgers, who, as you know, if you're a Padres fan, we hate the Dodgers. And so part of me was crying that like I missed that clinching game where we swept the Dodgers. The other part of me is like, but I just paid for my trip to New York. So
the most I've paid for a single sporting event is I went to see the last World Series game in DC between the Nationals and the Astros. Yeah, and it was $600 for standing room.
Wow.
So I did that. And we lost, but we won the World Series, and that's the important
there you
thing.
go.
My best flip was I got Knicks tickets early on, and it was during Linsanity.
Oh,
So,
God, yeah.
I was able. I sold those for like at least 5 times what I paid, enough that I was able to still go to that same game just in worse seats and make. It was crazy how much it was going back then.
Yeah. What, and kind of like looking back on everything, what were some of your early fandoms or geeky things that kind of eventually would inadvertently blossom to you being at CBR?
Well, I know for me, in general, I grew up on crime dramas. My joke is that while everybody else was watching cartoons and Sesame Street, my seminal shows as a kid were the original Law and Order and Homicide: Life on the Street, and I'm going to date myself, The Equalizer. The show, not the movies. I want to be clear here. And that kind of explains why I grew up into the adult that I did, because actually I wanted to be a homicide detective. Still have a great amount of reverence for that profession. And so that's what I grew up on. And then, Sam, you actually brought it up. My first big show I remember being really obsessed with was Sports Night, Aaron Sorkin's Sports Night.
Sure.
And that was the show where I kind of made the pivot. I had always been geeking out about TV and always wanted to be a writer. But then I saw that show and I went, wait a minute, you can write like that for television? Like I just thought that was the kind of writing you had to do in a novel or something that was much bigger. And so as soon as I saw that show and then The West Wing came out, I was like, I want to do that. Like, I want to be that guy. And I pivoted to screenwriting, and then when my screenwriting career didn't work out, my friends were like, they also pay people to sit around and talk about television, which you've been doing for 20 years. And I went, oh, yeah, right. no, actually, it was right after I had my surgery and broke both of my legs. I was actually wheelchair bound for about 2 years, and it was great because I was available for everything. I'm sure you guys remember when conference calls still used to be a thing.
Sure.
I was available for every conference call, every screener that came my way, because I had all this time on my hands.
Right.
And so my recovery period became the same period in which I built my career, because that was what I was able to focus on. So I joke that my career makes absolutely no sense at all. I had never intended to be in this field, and here we are, 25, it'll be 25 years next year in this field. So
Yeah. Brian, I mean, you've got the comic book deep dives on lock. You remember where that all started?
Well, it's funny. My mother was a children's librarian for many years, and so I would go visit her all the time and constantly taking out books from the library. And it was there I probably first saw, collections of comic books and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And anytime, if there was any sort of comic related thing, I would be taking out 3 of them every day when I visit her. And I guess that really got me into the comics in general. But what's funny is I probably didn't really get into comics until I was almost roughly like a teenager. A lot of people, especially people who are weirdo comic history guys like me, tend to start a little bit earlier than that. I wrote a book about the X-Men, and it's funny trying to admit that my first issue of X-Men, Claremont had already left the book by the time I started.
Oh, man.
So
yeah. Early 90s, okay. Yeah.
So it's just funny, right, that to be that into it while missing those early stuff. It's funny.
The seminal years.
Yeah. But again, I guess you could read them in back issues, so that was always a good thing. So
yeah. I remember all that hype around X-Men #1, and
right.
I think I have all the covers. I think I still have all of the interconnecting covers for that. And I remember Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man #1 was around the same time, and that was huge. My first comic book was Death of Superman #75, Volume 2.
Yep. There you go.
Because I remember kids talking about it on the schoolyard, like Superman's, this is it. He's getting cooked. And I was like, it's Superman. He can, I had grown up watching like TV Land or Nick at Night reruns of like Adventures of Superman with George Reeves. And so that was kind of, I still have fond memories of that. And the stock sound effects whenever he flies, like the wind tunnel. And so, I remember reading Superman #75 off the shelf, and I still have that.
You got into it just when he dies. It's over,
Well, it was a weird time, right? Because like Superman in that period, Superman died. Batman was like put on, like had his back broken.
Right.
Green Lantern went nuts. Spider-Man was maybe a clone, and not even the editors knew at that point, like if that's like what they were going with it. So I kind of jumped into comics at like this weird transition period, and then everything kind of like the peak of 90s comics, and then everything kind of, gelled thereafter. But in terms of like television and movies, it all ties back to whatever was on, I wouldn't go as far to call myself a latchkey kid, but I definitely had free reign of the basement a lot of the time, and whatever was on in those early days of cable. Sci-fi used to show Godzilla every Saturday, Godzilla movies every like Showa era Godzilla movies every Saturday morning. So I would watch like Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. Star Trek, the original series, was on reruns. Next Generation was still on the air. I remember catching episodes of TNG when it was still, a thing. And then, in terms of like parlaying that into a career, it's kind of a complicated, like Brittany, it's kind of a complicated, roundabout, accidental story. I mean, because nobody plans this. Nobody plans this.
That is true.
When I was in grad school, I had started a podcast because I was doing the driest, longest readings of my entire life. And I was like, I just want an outlet where I can talk about Star Wars and stuff like that. And, we would talk about comics, and Image Comics at that time had a preview magazine, Image Plus, and they asked me if I could talk to their talent, and then they asked me if I could write for the magazine, and then like a lot of print media, the magazine eventually got discontinued, at that time, Albert was working at CBR, and he asked if I wanted to come on board, and I did, and here I am almost 6 years later. So
Wow.
it's been a wild, weird ride, but it's like one of those things like, and I'm sure you guys like face this too. Whenever somebody offers you something, you just always say yes. Like,
I think that might be a product of our generation, because I know the longer that I stayed in this business, I would work with other writers and I would say, hey, we have this opportunity. Is anybody interested? And I got a lot of overwhelming, oh, I don't watch that show, or I don't follow that person, so I'm not going to do it.
mm,
And I don't know if you guys have similar stories, but some of the best opportunities in my career have come from me going, yeah, I don't know what that is, but I'll take a shot and I'll go do the research and I'll go see what it is. And then you step into the room and you discover a new show that you love, or you meet somebody that you really click with. One of my oldest friends, I just spoke to him, is Michael Trucco from Battlestar Galactica.
oh yeah,
We've known each other for, I believe, 13 years now. And we met, he did a show for USA called Fairly Legal. I just happened to be doing a lot of press with USA Network at the time. And so that was their next show up. And they sent me the screener. And I said, I really like this dude's performance. Like, get this dude on the phone. I want to kind of get to know him.
Mhm.
And we hit it off immediately. And he's still to this day one of my best friends and biggest supporters. And that all happened just because I was like, yeah, seems like a good idea at the time. Let's do that.
yeah, yeah. Like what? We're doing this fresh off the Emmys. What shows are you kind of like really connecting with these days? Be it stuff that aired, across the 2023 season or even early in 2024.
Brian, I think I'm going to let you take that one to start, because a lot of what I've been watching is the same stuff I've been watching, to be honest. In fact, actually, the last thing I got really excited about watching was a show that everybody forgot about that popped up on Hulu randomly out of nowhere. And I was like, I can watch this again!
That's hilarious. What's funny about the Emmys this year, it pretty much was 3 shows won everything.
Yeah.
And yet, at the same time, you can't really blame them, because The Bear and Succession are both really, really, really good shows. So
yeah.
I really can't. You can't begrudge them in any of these categories. Although it's that funny thing, as obviously everyone's discussing, the idea of The Bear as a comedy.
Yeah. And Succession as a drama.
It's that funny thing of suddenly it's difficult. It's sort of like, remember the old days whenever, I mean, it still goes on today, when the clear lead of the movie says that they're a supporting actor because they know they had no chance of winning lead actor. And like Brad Pitt is the supporting actor in
Once Upon a Time.
Yeah, Once Upon a Time, when he's or even a famous one was Training Day. Ethan Hawke is in every scene of Training Day. Every scene of the movie is from his perspective, and yet he's a supporting actor for the movie.
I'm trying to remember. I mean, I feel like Denzel is like top billed though.
Denzel's amazing, and it's just funny that how are you supporting actor when you're in every scene of the movie? It's from Ethan Hawke's perspective, every scene.
Yeah, no, I get that. I'm just trying to think like in terms of billing, like just
I'm sure Denzel was listed first.
Yeah, just like I'm pretty sure Leo's listed first for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, even though so much of the story falls on Cliff Booth and not Rick Dalton. Yeah, I'm a huge Better Call Saul fan, and it kind of set the record for most nominations and 0 wins.
I can understand. I was just talking to someone. I can understand Odenkirk not getting, even though I agree. I think he should have gotten an award at some point.
At least once. Come on.
At least it's a tough category. Succession every year. It's tough. I get it. But Rhea Seehorn, never.
Oh, she's so good.
It's insane that in fact, it's insane that it was a success that she even got nominated, because they didn't even nominate her most of the seasons.
Yeah.
It's absurd.
Yeah. I love The Bear. Bear's great. But yeah, I was bummed. I thought they'd at least get a bit of gold before, because that's, according to Vince Gilligan, that's it. He's like, all right, I've done everything I wanted to do in the Breaking Bad universe. I've done my continuation movie. I've done my spin-off series. Right. I'm good. Just like, okay, well, all right. Just know that we love you. But and I've been to prep for I guess a peek behind the curtain a bit, to prep for like Tokyo Vice season 2. I've been rewatching Tokyo Vice season 1, and I was just in Tokyo earlier this week, and it's wild. I forgot how Michael Mann that show is.
It's very Michael Mann. That's a good.
Yeah. Which I love. Michael Mann. Even some of his like. Even stuff like The Keep, I'm like, oh, I see what you're trying to do here. All right, cool. But like, Britt, you're a big crime show person. Have you watched any, Tokyo Vice?
I haven't yet, but I did read the book. Now, Sam, are you a big proponent of like reading the book if there is a book? Because I've always been, if I have the time, I'll go and I'll read the book of something first.
I actually do it the opposite way. I go and look at the book afterwards, so it doesn't color my opinion of the movie. You could argue, but you're coloring your option of the book. It's like, no, because I know that this is the source material in a lot of cases. Right. There's obviously like differences with that. I mean, every time I watch a comic book movie, I'm like, oh, okay, that you're drawing from this, and this. But I haven't read. Is it a good book?
It is. I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites, but I have pretty high standards. My favorite book of all time is still David Simon's Homicide.
That's an amazing book.
It's that and book. John Douglas's Mindhunter are still my top two. So my favorite version of that, though, to your point, actually was Knock at the Cabin, because I'm sure you remember you were helping me prep for that interview. I had read the book. Yes. And was like, okay, everything works out fine in the end. This is great. I have no reason to be upset. And then, of course, you come in and go, yeah, by the way, ending of the movie totally different. And Jonathan bites it. And I was like, oh, thank you very much. And so actually, I remember carrying that into the interview. I asked them, I said, yeah, did you guys, actually get time to read the book? Because I said, I went into the movie thinking everything was fine. I didn't need to be worried about anything. And then Jonathan dies. So you know what? Screw you, Ben Aldridge. And Ben just loses it laughing. And we all did. That's the end of the interview. I don't think it made it into the cut that's on YouTube. But the end of the interview was just all three of us just died. Because I was like, everything was fine. And then Jonathan Groff is dead now and I'm sad.
Well, yeah. I mean, you got to preserve the surprise.
Oops.
I think everybody forgets that movie came out last year too. Like nobody talks about that movie. Nobody's like, oh, there's another M. Night Shyamalan movie that came out in like January, and it was fine. It wasn't, there's better and worse M. Night Shyamalan movies, but I thought that one was all right. Yeah, no, I remember that's one of those ones where I was like, oh, by the way, this is, it's or like. It's interesting watching Oppenheimer after you read like American Prometheus, because there's a lot. I mean, American Prometheus being a book it's a huge book, and there's a lot of stuff that it covers that understandably doesn't make the film, that they sometimes only allude to if they allude to at all. But yeah, no, I tend to go back after I've sampled something and check it out from there. And in some cases, like. Here's something that I've been kind of vibing on. I do a lot of horror stuff. Have you guys ever seen seen or read Peter Straub's like Ghost Story?
No, right, I'm squeamish. I avoid the whole horror genre.
Oh, Brian,
Ghost Story, the 80, the old
81,
one?
Yeah,
the 81. Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, yeah.
With Fred Astaire, his last movie.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, yeah, that is a good movie. Yeah. It's funny, we were talking about that when I did the recent Dynamic Duos with Eric Powell and Becky Cloonan, because that's basically the inspiration for their new Dark Horse collection, Four Gathered on Christmas Eve, which is four gathered to do ghost stories and inspired by Ghost Story.
Which is like, that's another one of those ones where they really streamlined Straub, because that's a big novel.
Right.
And I want to say the movie's like less than 2 hours. And I think
so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have some problems with the movie, like it's as an adaptation, not as much as like Stephen King does with The Shining, but. And have you been seeing that discourse online lately? Like people like renewing, like the Stephen King.
Oh, Kubrick. The problem he has with Shining.
Yeah, like the one adaptation where he's kind of like, and it's just like. But at the same time, intensely personal story for Stephen King. So it makes, not to mention he's the author. So if he doesn't like it, he has that right.
Well, I guess a lot of those times you got these stories where movie time just isn't enough for that story. All these guys, they all love miniseries of their book because that gives them the time to actually get it done. You know.
Well, also, like, spoilers for a 40-some-year-old movie at this point, but in the novel, Jack redeems himself.
Right.
He regains enough control to destroy the Overlook. And in the novel, which, you could argue, or in the movie, he doesn't. He freezes in the hedge maze. So it was interesting watching Dr. Sleep like reconcile the two, kind of like work as almost like a retread of The Shining and also adapt the novel Dr. Sleep. Yeah, I'm a huge horror. One of these days, I need to talk to Stephen King. I've talked to Joe Hill a couple of times. I've just never quite gotten King yet. I've covered so many King adaptations. I just need to one day, maybe if I just hang out in like small town Maine,
just go to Maine, just hang
he'll
out.
just like summon. He'll just like appear. And I'll finally talk to him about AC/DC or whatever. He's a huge AC/DC.
I finally met Sorkin a couple years ago when he was doing the newsroom, and it is one of the rare instances in which I have forgotten how the English language works. Yeah, it was just kind of at the end of the thing. It wasn't even a formal interview. Just the publicist who was working the press line knew that I was a huge fan of his and said, I want to introduce you to somebody. And he comes over and he's just like, oh, hi, it's nice to meet you. And I'm just like, oh, my God, hi. Like, I am such a huge fan of you. And I explained to him, I said, Sportside is the show that set me on this particular career path. And we were talking about that for a while. I was so out of it that my friend that was working the line next to me hits me in the arm. And I go, what? And he goes, do you want to ask him to take a picture with you? And I went, oh, yeah. Like, I had completely...
Blanked.
Just gotten suckered into it. But yeah, those are the great moments. Have you guys ever had those moments where you're like, I will never get this interview. There is no way that I will ever even be in the room with somebody, and then it comes through?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, all the time. There's part of me that's kind of like, it's every interview is kind of its own unexpected gift, especially if it's at... Now, I've never talked to Aaron Sorkin, but, I invoked Nicolas Cage earlier. Nicolas Cage is one of those guys. Yeah, one of my favorite memories of New York Comic Con, this past New York Comic Con, has nothing to do with... It wasn't an interview. It was... It was in between interviews. I was hanging out at the Storm King Comics booth on the show floor, talking to Sandy King Carpenter. And John Carpenter's there the entire time. And after I talked to Sandy, it's just me, and there's no video of it. I didn't ask for a picture because that would completely change the dynamic. Like selfie with John Carpenter, how would that go? It's just me and John Carpenter comparing notes about video games. Because if you ever talk to John Carpenter, he's talked about his own work. He doesn't really want to talk about his own work. But if you talk to him about video games, like he's a huge fan of Sonic Unleashed. I don't know what you do with that, but so I remember telling him that Sega has since delisted that game digitally. I was like, yeah, that's a collector's item now, John. He was kind of surprised because he actually, legitimately enjoys the Sonic the Hedgehog game where Sonic can turn into a werewolf. But yeah, so yeah, I mean every interview. Brian, have you ever had like a pinch me interview?
It's funny. I always think about the worst opportunity I missed, which was years ago. I got a message. I just didn't see it. I didn't see it in time. It was from Roberto Aguirre Sacasa, who was working on an updated version of the Superman musical from the 60s. And he was in town doing a workshop with Charles Strouse, the guy who wrote the original musical and wrote Annie. He did, really big musical composer. And he's still alive. He's got to be like 97. He's an old dude, still around. And they were working on
Andrew Lloyd Webber years, yeah.
And he says, if you want to come down, we're working on the workshop. If you want to come in and see what we're doing, didn't get it in time. And I get that just haunted me ever since.
There's nothing like. How about Grant Morrison? They're a great interview. Like, have you ever had the pleasure of talking to Grant?
No, never had the opportunity. That's a good one. Yeah, never had the opportunity.
Oh.
That's amazing when you mention that, though. It is that kind of cool thing. Like when I did my second book, and part of it was I had guest lists. I had comic creators do guest spots, and it is really cool to be able to go, "Hey, I'm writer XYZ. Could you help me? Do me a favor and do a list for my book." And the amount of people who showed up to help was really nice. Mm-hmm. So that is really cool when you do it long enough that you know these people, that they'll do you favors.
Yeah. I mean, and it's the interesting thing about comics. It's not a big, like, it's a relatively close knit, tight knit community.
That's
fair. Especially when it comes to the, for lack of a better term, like the majors, like in terms of like people that have worked with the big two, like people know each other and there's
right.
reputations, and you find out who gets along with who and who doesn't. And, I mean, especially for you, Brian, you tread in the urban legend and deep dive. So, a lot of that lore, so to speak.
Well, the funny thing you mentioned about that is that I've been doing it long enough now. I was looking at someone asked a question, so I went back to an old column. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of depressing when you see the answers I got to that column. And you're like, oh, like Len Wein, George Perez, Dick Giordano. They all, I used to be able to talk to all those guys, and now so that's one of the sad things. But at the same time, it's a blessing because I was able to talk to all these guys. Before, that's awesome.
I never talked to Len, never talked to Stan. I talked to George once, not for an interview, just as a fan. I just kind of approached him and thanked him for all his work, and he was closing up his table, and he was like, "I don't have time for a commission." I was like, "I'm not asking for one, not asking for one. just wanted to thank you." Got him to sign my copy of Crisis on Infinite Earths. At the time, it was the 20th anniversary copy. Now we're coming up in a couple years on next year on the 40th anniversary of Crisis.
Right, Secret Wars. It's the 40th anniversary of Secret Wars right now.
I know.
It's crazy.
Man, yeah. Britt, you ever get into you were talking about television and stage. You ever get into the old comic book or superhero realm?
I did growing up. I have fallen out of it, but I was big into the X-Men as a kid. I very strongly identified with that as somebody from an underrepresented group. I still remember being really excited when the first X-Men movie came out 24 years ago, that, hey, we finally got an X-Men movie. And that was my introduction to Hugh Jackman, which,
yeah.
Of course, look at what he's gone on to accomplish. I got to see him in concert a few years ago, and that was fantastic. But yeah, I still have boxes of X-Men and Captain America and all the associated X books that are sitting in my bedroom. Because, of course, that was the thing with comic books, too, is you get really anal about them. It's like, I must polybag these, and then I must organize them correctly, and then don't touch them.
Yeah, I alphabetize mine by family. So even though New Mutants would ostensibly go with the N's, they're with the X titles. And even though Adventures of Superman should theoretically go A, it's with the Superman title. It's like I'm very meticulous about, how I live in a 1-bedroom apartment. It's those long boxes, they
take up space, yes.
Take up some space. It's I'm thinking about buying a house, and part of it is like, cool to have a basement again where I can just shove all my long boxes.
My favorite book growing up, and this made me apparently uncool, was I was a big Human Target fan, actually.
Oh, wow.
And so what made me really happy was when they adapted that to series for Fox. They cast Mark Valley, who happens to be one of my favorite actors. And so that show was like some weird confluence of everything I was into. It's like, hey, it's my favorite comic book, played by my favorite actor. And look who's doing the composing. Oh, look, it's Bear McCreary. I'm just going to stand here and geek out. And so I had the best time for the 2 years that show was on the air. And actually was really cool about it was Mark and I met actually at WonderCon. Mark and I became friendly. I haven't talked to him in a little bit, but he was always fantastic. And then Bear, because I've worked with him now on other projects, Walking Dead and things like that,
Right.
Yeah.
got me a copy of the sheet music for the theme from Human Target and signed it
that's
for me,
sweet.
and it's in my office.
I
So I have that memento of saying, hey, they finally brought my favorite comic to TV, and I got to be a significant part of that. Even if it's just a small part, what I did made some kind of impact in that.
What about not the Rick Springfield Human Target?
No, dear God, no.
Bear is one of my favorite. I love doing music interviews. We don't understandably venture into that space a whole lot. But when we do, I always love doing it, and Bear is one of my favorites. Like, I got to talk to him for Rings of Power last year when they were like doing their big Emmy push.
Right.
And he's great. I love talking to Bear. Yeah, I can't say enough. Him and Michelle Zauner from Japanese Breakfast. I got to interview her because she did the soundtrack to Sable, available now on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, and PC. And yeah, I mean, those are, and like me, Michelle's half Korean, and so it was really cool, kind of comparing notes, because I don't see her at any of the half Korean meetings that we have in secret.
If we're going to talk about favorite interviews that other people, might not be as aware of, I do want to give a shout out to my crew with the First 48. I have been a fan of that show since it started decades ago. I believe we are coming up on the 25th anniversary. I could be wrong. But particularly in the last couple of years, I got bored and I said, I'm just going to start talking about this show. Like, I really have an appreciation for homicide detectives, and particularly the folks in Tulsa Homicide. Shout out to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I said, I'm just going to start writing. And God bless, she's no longer with us, Lizzie Lanuza, who was here, and she was listening to me talk about this show. And I said, can I write about this show? I mean, no one else other than me watches it, but I really, really care about it. She says, yeah, try it. Go ahead and try it. And so I wrote a piece about Tulsa Homicide and the show. And next thing I know is I'm getting an Instagram message from one of their former homicide detectives saying, oh, we really enjoy your articles. And I kind of just stared at my phone and went, what? And messaged him back and said, that's funny. I really appreciate your work. And he says, well, I said, it kind of makes me want to go visit Tulsa. You all sound like a really interesting, really upstanding, bunch of people. He says, if you ever make it out here, let me know, and I'd love to introduce you to the team. And so actually, when I was going to see Merrily off Broadway, I said, I got a flight back across the country anyway. So I hit him up and I said, hey, is that offer good? And he says, absolutely. He says, let me know what day you'll be in town. And they set it up. And I was lucky enough to actually walk into the Tulsa Homicide Unit. I got to meet all of the currently serving detectives, and actually two of my favorites who had retired but were still in the building. They specifically called them and said, we want you to come down here and meet her. And so it was the coolest experience of my life to not only have that glimpse about what it really means to be a homicide detective and see that other way that my life could have gone, but to stand in a room full of people that I genuinely look up to as a person and be like, dude, these people are excited that I'm here. Like,
yeah.
They knew who I was. They read my stuff. We stood there. We were talking shop forever. And I'm still in touch with a couple of those people.
Aww.
And so to go from, I watched these guys on my couch, 10 years ago, to Tulsa just broke the record, I think, for most episodes of the First 48 in the spring of 23, and say, now I know these people and they know my name, and some of them talk to me socially. Yeah. It was the coolest thing in the world. But yet I still bring that show up to people and they're like, wait, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
My brother is a huge First 48 fan, and when my sister-in-law started dating him, and they started seriously dating, she got a little unnerved how many First 48 episodes he had. She's like, wait.
They're over 500 now. I can't recall the exact number, and we are still going. A new season just started right after Christmas. But
so he had a lot on his DVR, and she was, for a brief moment there, she was like, is this concerning?
Yeah. Now, I always take for granted that people read my stuff, because I certainly don't look at the comments.
Right.
And I have dialed back my social media presence in a big way over the years. So anytime somebody mentions, whether it's somebody I know, a stranger, a celebrity, mentions that they've read some of my stuff, it always weirds me out. Because it's like, I do it and then I put it out of my
And
mind.
it disappears. You do it
Yeah.
and it disappears. No one ever thinks about it again,
Yeah.
right?
It goes into the submission world. I make sure it gets published, and that's it. So whenever somebody, I remember I was talking to Jared Padalecki for Walker, because I'm like, the site's Walker Man. And Jared was like, oh, I've read some of this, some of the stuff coverage you've done for our show. And I was just like, oh, okay. Like I had to like recollect myself. And that was like the very start of the interview. And it's like, oh, well, let's talk about the Walker.
No, I can do you one better on that, and this is the most embarrassing and also I think coolest random moment of my career. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Linus Roach, who was in Batman Begins and of course the final couple seasons of the original Law and Order before they brought it back. Right. Huge fan of his work, and I have a habit of sometimes my brain will wander and I'll just put out these random columns like on a Sunday going, I don't give a crap if anybody reads this, I just want to talk about it. Well, there was a Law and Order marathon, and I was like, I've never talked about how good he was on that show and what he brought to that show. I'm just going to do it on a Sunday and nobody cares. And so a year or so later, he was on Vikings. And I knew the publicist for History that was doing Vikings. And I said, hey, is there any shot we get this dude on the phone? Because I'm a huge fan of his. And she goes, yeah, we'll figure it out. So finally get this interview. The night before the interview, I've got bronchitis. Oh. And everyone's like, you have to cancel. And I said, no. Do you know how long I've waited to talk to Linus Roach? So I get on the phone. I'm doped up on like, NyQuil or Dayquil or whatever the thing. I am absolutely...
You can have both at the same time if you really want to pay.
So I'm already nervous enough because I'm nervous because it's him and I'm nervous because I'm sick. I get on the phone. They introduce me by name. And he goes, oh, you're the one that wrote that article about my Law and Order character. He goes, nobody has ever really understood what I was doing with that character until you wrote that article. And keeps going on for about straight 2 minutes. And so my brain, Sam, kind of like yours, was like, what? And my brain just exploded. And then I have to follow that. Yeah. And remember that I'm supposed to be having a conversation with this guy.
Yeah, and I'm here to ask the questions.
And I was like, wait, what? And then luckily, it worked because actually I had the honor of talking to him. I think we did 2 or 3 more interviews after that.
Oh.
So, I earned his respect, but all I remember is being absolutely, like, throttled on cold medication and then having to process this great compliment from an actor that I love and going, what?
He's great. I know you're not a big horror person, but if you've ever seen the movie Mandy with Nicolas Cage,
but isn't he in that?
That's my yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just an unrated movie. Just wondering if you.
Yeah. I'm just throwing that. Yeah. No. It's Linus Roach. I'll simply say it is Linus Roach as you've never seen him before in Mandy. He does a really good job. Do you guys game at all? Do you guys like play video games?
I do.
What was your first console? What was your first console, Britt?
I go all the way back to the Sega Genesis and what the heck was the thing? Wasn't the Super Nintendo? No, it was the Sega Master System, the thing that was like the size of a brick.
Oh, the handheld is the Game Gear.
I still have one of those, but my first thing that I really got into was Streets of Rage 2 on the Genesis. And of course, this being before the save function was invented, I spent I don't know how many hours straight to beat that game. I think I was up at 4 a.m, and my family's coming out like, do you want to go to bed? And I'm like, no, because if I turn this thing off, I have to start all over again.
I lose everything.
Yeah. No, Streets of Rage 2 is the best game on the Sega Genesis. Like, it's almost empirical to say that. It is so good. It's got some of the best early 90s soundtrack played through that blast processor. Though I was a Nintendo kid growing up. First console I ever owned was a Super Nintendo. I started on the NES, at friends' houses, but I was a Super Nintendo kid, and now I have all 3. I have all 3 of the main consoles and a gaming PC, and it's kind of, some people collect stamps. I collect comic books and video games. That's kind of that's where I'm at. Every time I go to Japan, I go to the vintage, video game shops.
For the old. Oh, gotcha. Like the real
stuff
that we have here. Those sort of games.
Yeah. And I have like a Super Famicom, and I was about to get a regular ass Famicom when I was in Tokyo this week, but you have to bring it. It's hard bringing it back. It's hard, like even with all the games, they still like flagged my bag, and they were like, "What's going on here?" And it's just like, it's just game cartridges. It's just 16-bit game cartridges. It's fine.
Trust me, come on. It's suspicious,
Yeah.
but then ignore it.
Look at me. Look at me. I'm aware. I'm wearing
I
like
spent some time in esports actually, which was really fun. I did not see that as a direction my career was going to go, but when Turner Sports launched E-League,
Yeah.
I was heavily involved in the Counter-Strike seasons for that. Actually got to go out to Atlanta and work with their broadcast team, interview all those guys, and that turned out to be really fun. It was just one of those things like I thought, oh yeah, this is kind of interesting. You know, I'll maybe do a piece on it. And soon I was talking to all of their analysts, and they were like, "You want to come out and actually watch a tournament and actually interview some of the players?" And I was like, "Okay," and that was a boatload of fun. What's actually really fun about it is because it was live. You can see me in the background. I actually had a chair with my name on it.
Oh,
Which was like, I was like, okay, this is when you know you've made it in your career, is when you show up somewhere and there's something with your specific name on it. And of course, I got all really excited, like I'm doing let me take an Instagram picture of the chair with my name on it, and let me tell everybody at home, like, hey, make sure you tune in, I'm going to be... And of course, everybody missed it. I came home from that trip and I said, yeah, did you guys see me on TV? And everyone's like, oh, we forgot that was on. I was like, oh, come on. The one time I can brag, you guys totally missed it.
Yeah. I've always thought about getting into streaming. I've always thought about, like, I don't like getting into Twitch or Mixer or something like that. And, you know, not that my thing is, and it kind of comes with writing, like not journalistic writing, but just writing creatively or whatever.
Right.
I always wonder, like, what do I have to bring in the table that doesn't already exist? And so when it comes to streaming, it's like, should I get into streaming? There's plenty of streamers. What do I have that doesn't, like, okay. Or would you just do it for the love of the game? I don't know. That's one of those things that it's kind of a pseudo resolution I have coming into 2024. I have all the hardware. I have a webcam. I have a capture card. I have, the consoles. Yeah, it's something I think about. If people would want to see this face playing.
I don't think you have to. I mean, it's one of those things where whether or not you're what you, as you say, new, you have you. I mean, obviously, like, say you're writing per se, it's good, and your interviews are good because of who you are. Even if other people do the same stuff, you do it just as well. So come on, I would totally do that stuff.
It took me a while. You know, it was one of the editors that no longer like works with us anymore, but she was like, you know, I was like, I do interviews all right. Yeah, I do okay. She's like, no, you're like good at this. And I was like,
yeah.
I'm at a point in my career covering like as an entertainment journalist or whatever you want to call it, where I'm like, look, I've been around the game long enough, and that's not a fluke.
Right, exactly.
I concede that I'm reliable. Like, I'll go that far. And so, yeah, it's a matter of like, because I mean, Brian, you've written a book. Like, there's parts of me that's like, well, I know enough about pop culture to theoretically write a book. I would just need to like find an agent, I guess.
Well, I mean, it's book. Don't get me wrong. Is it cool to have? I've written a few books, and is it cool? Yes, it's cool to have written a couple of books and be able to have some tangible little things and go, hey, here are my 3 books that people paid me to go write. That is cool. But I mean, the publishing industry is so different nowadays.
Yeah.
And really, what we're doing here online, people see it a lot more than they're ever going to see the books that we do. So
yeah.
So I think you'll see, you'll have a presence out there that people will know Sam Stone, I think, and it's
I guess I keep getting offers. So
you'll be surprised by how much of an impact this stuff has.
I think that's a lesson that I've had to learn too, getting older. I used to have kind of similar to what Sam was saying earlier, real aversion to being on camera.
Right.
I don't like the way I look. I don't like the way I sound. I tend to look like I'm 15, and it gets really awkward in certain press situations. But I kind of realized as I got older, I said, you know what, I'm just going to do what I love.
Right.
And become comfortable with that. Stop trying to be the journalist that I think people want to see or the person I think people want to see, and I'm just going to go and do something because I love it. And I think that comes through. I think whether you're writing or whether you're doing something like this or whether, I have a separate podcast that I do, the most important thing is people can tell when you care what you're doing.
Yeah.
And
That's good.
that's kind of how I've started to do it. I mean, that's how I got into acting. I finally just put my hands down and said, I don't care anymore if anybody judges me for the way I look doing this. It's something that I want to do, and it turns out I really love doing it.
Yeah.
And Jonathan Groff thinks I'm amazing at it. So, you know what? Even if nobody else ever says anything nice to me about it again, I have that one thing.
I think the most compliments I've ever gotten on my work was either the Sandman Netflix interview at San Diego Comic-Con in 2022 or the Critical Role Legend of Vox Machina interview I did in New York also in 2022. Because especially the Critical Role fans, they'll let you know if you get it wrong.
Oh, they will. Yep.
And so they reached out and were very complimentary to that interview. And I was just like, oh, thank God. Because I would, that's what it comes down to. You don't want to let the talent and the studio and the fans down. Put in somebody that actually knows the work or will do the research. And so it is a huge deal to me when.
Do you know who the most critical fans I've ever dealt with in X amount of years? Ready?
And it's not X-Men.
No, you'll never. The hardest, like, these dudes are so into it, and if you are slightly off, Garfield fans.
Oh, I was going to say ElfQuest is my second.
Garfield. Of all Garfield fans, don't mess around. I've written a few Garfield articles over the years, and those guys get very upset about anything.
Is it Monday? Do they hate it if it comes out on Monday? Do they get grumpy? Is it a
I
case?
just love the idea that the Garfield fandom is out there, and they are ready to check you if you, you step out of line.
I love how Garfield has become like him and SpongeBob are like ironic icons. Like they just
No, Garfield's amazing. You shut up.
Now,
not ironic. Garfield, I love you. Garfield's amazing. Everyone knows that.
Next time I'll wear my Neon Genesis Evangelion shirt, but I don't know if you can find it online. It says Neon Genesis Evangelion, but it's in the style of the Garfield and Friends, like 90s cartoon show with Garfield on it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. That's the, and I remember if you go to like Harajuku, which is kind of like the thrift fashion neighborhood in Tokyo, you can find tons of Garfield merch. They love Garfield and Harajuku.
As well they should, because Garfield's amazing. Everyone acknowledge that. We all know this.
Oh yeah. I still have my like weird shaped newspaper strip shaped trades, trade paperbacks from like the 90s. Yeah, no, I love Garfield. Please don't kill me, Garfield Mafia. I remember using, because they originally printed them in the 90s. They were printed in black and white, and my mom used to buy me colored pencils, and I used to color the comic strips, comic strip collections, and I used to do that a bit with Peanuts too. Which is, they're about to get a new collection and a new TV special. So keep an eye out for that. So, Peanuts and Garfield for me are like God tier. And Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin and Hobbes is also God tier comic strip. So
yeah, Paige Braddock she's doing a really nice job with the Peanut stuff. It's nice to know that they have that Shelton's work is in such good hands with people. That's always nice to see.
And then his kids are still like, involved with
right
with all that. But yeah, I think we're coming up on time. Anything you guys are looking forward to in 2024 as we kind of, kick off this year now that we're less than 3 weeks into it?
We know Brittany's looking forward to. We know your Broadway show you're looking forward to, right, Britt?
Yeah, that's going to be fun. I also get to go, and we're doing Back to the Future, the musical, while I'm out there, and Spamalot, so that'll be fun.
Nice.
I am waiting for the next series or the rumored special for Line of Duty. I am a huge fan of that show, and I know they were talking about maybe doing a special to bridge the gap between series, or they were just going to roll into a new series. So I'd love to see that hit at some point next year because that's always a must watch for me. If you haven't caught up on that yet, that is one of the best crime dramas of all time. And actually, it's funny. I keep telling my acting coach, I said I really want to play Martin Compston's role in Line of Duty because I'm a huge Martin Compston fan, huge fan of that show. I said the problem is finding a scene from that you can do in an acting class because every scene is about 10 straight pages of dialogue and it's just two people sitting in a room talking, which is really hard to do in an acting class. Like, let's just sit here for 30 odd minutes and run this whole thing. So maybe one of these days I'll get to play Steve Arnott, but
Right on. Brian, you got anything?
What's funny, Brett, is that you see that how Richard Linklater's doing the Merrily movie?
yes.
That it's going to take 25 years to film it, which is awesome. And he already replaced his lead actor, which is always fun when you're doing a project that's going to take 25 years to film. But any event, I was just thinking, that reminds me because Linklater has a new movie coming out with Glenn Powell. That sounds really awesome. Where Powell is co-writing the movie, so that sounds like that's going to be a lot of fun later this year.
Yeah.
On the comic side, how cool is it that we have this Ultimate Spider-Man comic book with Jonathan Hickman, where A, it's a really cool comic book, but B, people are really into it.
Oh, it's
and it's been a while since we've had a comic book that people are really into. To the same level, and it's really cool to see what it's like when people get super into a new comic book. It
lifts the entire medium almost.
Totally.
There's this like cross market or beyond market appeal. So that first issue of Ultimate Spider-Man is one of the best issues, one of the best number ones I've read in a long time, for Marvel or otherwise. I'm curious to see what I enjoyed the first Jason Aaron issue of Action. I'm a huge DC kid, so it's been cool watching Josh Williamson on Superman and Jason now on Action. And, creator owned wise, keeping an eye on Distillery, keeping an eye on Ghost Machine as that's coming and rolling out. And Jason's about to relaunch or do whatever with Ninja Turtles, so that's going to be bananas.
That's really interesting, right? Yeah,
it is. It's interesting to see what writers do as soon as they get out of their exclusivity contracts. And so now that he's like doing DC and IDW, it's cool. It's cool, and Jason's a good guy. So yeah. And in terms of like video games, we're about to get a new Tekken, baby. We're getting back into the fighting game world. It's if you're a fighting game fan. New Street Fighter, new Mortal Kombat, new Tekken in less than a year. We live in. So I think we're in for a fun year, and
next month we're going to have all the new TVs going to start back up, so that's always good.
Yeah, Constellation on Apple TV Plus.
Well, technically this week it actually did because NBC kicked off their fall schedule this week.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
Yeah. I've been doing the One Chicago shows, and then tonight is Law and Order Thursday. I have to cover all of.
How many episodes are they going to do? 13? How many are they doing?
I don't know if it's been announced, but it's really interesting when you're embedded in a franchise like that. I've been embedded with One Chicago for years. I don't do as much of it as I used to, but when they all air on the same night, and you're going, I have to sit here for 3 hours straight. So this particular year, I've already told our colleagues at CBR. I said no. I said I will do if there were screeners. I will help you out. I'm not sitting here doing 3 hours on a Wednesday and 3 hours on a Thursday to cover two franchises. No.
Yeah. I remember having to cover the Arrowverse at its peak, right?
Oh, geez, you're right.
You'd have half a dozen shows, and it was just like, and then I would also cover. What else? Because I was doing a lot of CW stuff at the time, so I was also covering Walker. I was covering Kung Fu. And I was covering I was doing a little bit of Riverdale stuff, and it was a lot. It was, and now not as much because of CW's current strategy. So who knows? But it's been good comparing notes, guys. And, maybe we can do that. I don't know what the plans are. Maybe we can do this again.
Yeah, anytime.
That'd be fun.
Well, yeah, I'm so glad you three could talk, and so glad. Always a joy to listen, and you've given me a lot to look forward to in the new year. So thank you all for that, and
I just had this image of like Dustin, you just passed out somewhere on your couch while we were just going on. And
no, rigorously taking notes as you three were going on, plans for the year. So thank you, and thanks to our listeners, and we'll see you next time on Dynamic Duo.